to the Ramban on the Perasha. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, aka Nachmanides, once Spain had become Christian, and in the northern part of Spain, and it already started to become Christian, and the Ramban is dealing with a lot of religious debates, putting Judaism on trial. The Ramban is a fanatical Zionist without knowing what a Zionist was, and he had a love of Eretz Yisrael which was unbridled. And in his last few years of his life, he made it to Eretz Yisrael, and sadly, he passed away within a couple of years of getting there. But he was really focusing on those in the 1200s. He was really defending Judaism at a time where Christian Spain in that northern part was really cruel. But as I said, in those last few years, he made it to Eretz Yisrael. And to me, that's where you can see so much of the Ramban. Like any of you who've heard me quote the Ramban in sermons or in classes, you feel his love, his zeal for the Jewish people to be in its land, and that hopefully will come across in some of our sessions. Tonight, we are going to look at the Ramban's introduction to Sefer Devarim. And in this introduction, the Ramban is going to answer questions you never thought the medieval rabbi would talk about. Questions which maybe you'd find in a university, maybe you'd find in a reform, a seminary, but perhaps not amongst a seasoned rabbi of, probably one of the top 5 rabbis of the medieval period. So I'm going to begin here as follows. You can see this in your handouts, and we'll be sending that PDF for those of you who are watching online. It says as follows: Hasefer hazeh inyano yadua shehu mishneh Torah yiva'eh bo Moshe Rabbeinu ledor hanichnas ba'aretz rov mitzvot haTorah hatzrichot liYisrael. This book is well known to constitute a review of the Torah. It's a Mishneh Torah, in which Moshe, our teacher, explains to the generation entering the land most of the mitzvot of the Torah that pertain to the Jewish people. What is the Ramban addressing here? What do you think the challenges are that the Ramban might be facing, which he feels he needs to educate in the 1200s in Spain, that he feels this is what needs to be addressed? What might people be struggling with? What are the themes in Devarim which seem to be so challenging? What would you say? What would you think about? I'm going to open it up. Feel free to be put on the spot and to share what you think might be coming here, that the Ramban feels, I need to tell you that this is a Mishneh Torah, that this is a repetition, that this is a review. And it's for the generation entering Eretz Yisrael, and it's really going to be talking about most of the laws which apply to them. What's the Ramban struggling with here? What might the criticism be?
Well, if you're talking about dealing with Christianity, the fact that they said none of these mitzvot apply anymore. We don't need to do most of this, if any of it. So he's going to reiterate how important these mitzvot are, and the fact that they were mentioned again. They were mentioned twice.
Excellent, Marilyn. So he could definitely be talking to that audience, which is maybe Jews are feeling under pressure, and there's a need to defend Judaism against Christian attack.
Well, I think that the very fact that it's a Mishneh Torah, we've already learned most of these mitzvot, or many of them. And then in some cases, they're not exactly the same as what you have earlier. So it ultimately is going to raise questions in people's mind. Why is it repeated? Or why is it a little bit different than what we learned earlier?
Good. If it's a repeat, Mark, what are we learning new?
Yeah.
And if it's different, why is it different? And what question might it raise to us if there are textual variances, if there are difficulties in the text? What question might we have if we're modern day scholars? What question might we have? Again, this is the Ramban in the 1200s in Spain. What question is he dealing with here? You're not going to believe me. What are you going to say? Cormac?
I was just about to say that Ramban really represented the first Yeshuv movement of going into Eretz Israel, and since the whole concept of the Sefer Devarim is the huge transformation that Hashem's that type of open miracle presence would not be there anymore after Bnei Israel enters the land. And this is a major transformation of thinking into thought, how do we come into the land, how do we make it our home and develop it? And this might be something that Ramban and his movement are trying to tackle with.
Could be. I love it. It's not what the Ramban is dealing with, but I think it's really a question of maybe a question we should have, which is Devarim is focusing on Eretz Yisrael. It's focusing on mitzvot tuluyot ba'aretz, the mitzvot which are connected, which can not only be done but can be done better in the land of Israel. For some, only mitzvah which can be done in Israel. Maybe it's striving for us who don't yet live in Israel, that we should have a yearning for that we should desire in whatever way possible to connect to it. But believe it or not, friends, the Ramban might be defending the Torah against biblical criticism about multiple authors of the Torah. Perhaps what he could be writing here to defend is, who wrote Sefer Devarim? It doesn't sound like Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, and Bamidbar. And when it's different, and not merely repeated, Mark, perhaps those differences are highlighting that perhaps, God forbid, there are multiple authors to the Torah. Clearly something which we don't believe in, but something which we must address and answer.
Well, it's made even stronger by the fact that this is Moses talking here. In other words, it's not Sinai. This is clearly not Sinai.
Correct.
The way it sounds.
It's not Sinai, it's Moshe. What's happening here? How are we going to address all of this? So here, the Ramban in second paragraph there says, I'm going to strengthen my question. V'lo yazkir bo davar b'torat kohanim. V'lo ma'aseh hakorbanot. V'lo b'taharat hakohanim. U'v'ma'asehem shekvar bi'er otam lahem. And guess what, friends? There's going to be no mention in the Book of Devarim about the laws pertaining to the Kohanim, or how to do the Korbanot, or the purification process for the Kohanim, and how that's done. Because that has already been explained in Sefer Vayikra. What is going on here? There's not one mention, really, of Korbanot. We have Shechita, that's not Korbanot. There's no real mention of Korbanot in all of Sefer Devarim. I mean, there's a little bit, the Korbanot you bring for the Chagim. But there really is, but there's not really the details of how. It's not really directing. It's when you go up and you are seen, here are the Korbanot you will do when you enter when you go to the place where I will show you. It isn't how the blood will be offered and where it will be sprinkled.
It's the job of the person.
It's the job of the person, correct. So here, the question is, why is there no mention of Kohanic responsibility? And this will strengthen the question of, perhaps, Devarim, God forbid, is written by a different author. Not Moshe writing his repeat, but for God forbid, it's a different author at a different time period. Answers the Ramban, V'hakohanim zerizimhem, lo yitztrachu, la'azhara acha azhara. The priests, the Kohanim, they're zrizim. They do things with alacrity. They don't need to be warned time after time. You tell them to do it, they do it the first time. You don't need to warn them. You don't need to repeat them again. And we know this. We have certain students, we have certain family members. You tell them once, they got it. And there are certain students, certain family members, you got to tell them time after time after time. And they keep forgetting. They keep, what? I don't remember you telling me that. And we know what we're talking about here. So we're saying here, says the Ramban, there are Jews who are Kohanim. They are Zrizim. They don't need any reminders. They got this. But most of us are like Bnei Yisrael. And we need to be warned about the consequences of our actions. We need to be reminded not to do things from time to time. And this is what the Ramban is explaining. So it says the Ramban without saying it explicitly. Don't think that the Torah has multiple authors. Don't think this is written in a separate time period. This is for the generation coming into Eretz Yisrael. It's talking about Eretz Yisrael. It's talking about those mitzvot because this is the generation entering Eretz Yisrael. And why are there no mitzvot about the Kohanim? Because they don't need it. Not because it's a separate time period and God forbid it's no longer relevant, but because the Kohanim don't need those reminders. It says in the third paragraph, Aval b'Yisrael Yachazir ha-mitzvot hanohagot bahem, pam, losif bahem, bior, upam, shelo yachazir otam. But with the Jewish people, they are warned time and again about the mitzvot that apply to them. Sometimes to add further clarification, and sometimes only to caution them with multiple warnings. So you can't say, oh, I didn't know. Yeah, you did. It's 5 times in Devarim.
Aren't they having to be constantly reminded all the time of what's going on?
Right, but you know that, Larry. Like, there's some people, they could be asking you 5 times, where are we up to? What page are we on? What are we doing right now? And there's some person you could show them the first time, and they know. There's certain people you don't need to remind them, oh, by the way, tomorrow's a fast day. By the way, tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh. By the way, this is that. Like, they just know. And there are others. Can you remind me again, how do we prepare for Pesach? But there are some things which there are reminders of, even the general rules need breaking down and understanding. So, says the Ramban, Rak lahazhir et Yisrael, berov azharot, kemo sheyavo b'sefer hazeh, be'inyanei avodat gilulim, azharot merubot, zo achazo, betochachot, v'kol pachadim, asher yafchid otam, b'chol anshe ha'averot. There are, in this book, warning after warning, so many of them, regarding avodah zarah, idolatry. And they just come time after time, as well as rebuke and sounds of terror, casting upon them the fear of all of the onshim, all the punishments for their transgressions. Okay? If we had to say, what is the concern for the Jewish people? It's not, do the leaders know how to teach? Because remember, what were the Kohanim? The Kohanim were the rabbis of the day. The rabbis didn't need a review course. The Kohanim didn't need to be told what to do. It was the people. And what was the biggest issue of the time? Idolatry. It'll be today. What do we need to remind each other? What would we say? What would be the number one thing we have to explain? I would say the finer details of Hilchot Shabbat, or the finer details of checking vegetables, or the finer details of, Lashon Hara. There are certain areas of Jewish law where we struggle in, even when there are things which we should do constantly, where we need help and reassurance. But we wouldn't need a refresher on, maybe that's hard to say. I mean, you can give many examples of things we probably all need refreshers on, perhaps. I don't know. I guess once we get into halakha, we're stuck with it. But we don't need a history course. We don't need to tell us our history. We know where we came from. We know Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. We know how we went into Mitzrayim and Yosef and the brothers, and we know how we got out and the Yaseh Makot. But there's fine details of halacha which we struggle with.
I think it depends on the community you're in. Yeah, in
Yeah.
other words, in a community like this, it's the finer details.
It's the finer details, yeah.
In a non-Orthodox community,
History could be the one.
no, I don't think it's history, but I think the why becomes the bigger issue. Why should I be doing this? Sort of like the question of the Rasha.
Right.
And that becomes the crucial question for people.
I think it's called
And-
the who more than the why.
Right. But
Like who is Hashem and how am I relating to him? I think is the big question.
The Ramban now wants to switch tack. And it says, you know what? Everyone here at the beginning said, what is Sefer Devarim? It's all Mishneh Torah. It's just a repeat. Okay? It's a Control C, Control V, right? No? Control C, Control P? Yeah? How we do that? CA, CA? I know. CVCP? I know. No? Paste? What am I doing? V? All right, there we go. See, I do it, but I don't. I can see it, but I can't hear it. So it says here, "V'od Yosif b'Sefer Hazeh." But here, we're going to teach you kama mitzvot shalom nizkru klal, which were never mentioned at all in the first books. Kagon, for example, Hayibum, the law of Yibum, the Din Hamoti Shemra, and the law concerning what happens when someone speaks negatively about a girl and what happens there. The Hagirushin, the law of divorce. Hagirushin Beisha, the Eidim Zomimin, and the laws of witnesses who try to get you, false witnesses. What's going to happen there? They try to say that you were here at this time and they weren't there. What happens to them and their punishments? And V'zulato and others besides. There are many things here in Tevarim which were not mentioned previously. And so we have extra information here. So this could still raise a question of why this wasn't in the first 4 books. But it could be telling you why this is also essential and why it needs to be part of Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of the Torah. In the next paragraph, I think it's now up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs down. Ukva ne'emru lo kulan b'Sinai or be'ohel moed b'shana harishona kodem hameraglim. And I want to tell you something, says the Ramban. Don't think that all these laws were given at the end. Rather, says the Ramban, something hard for us perhaps to understand or appreciate. All these laws were given right at the beginning, before the sin of the spies, in that very first year when we were all at Sinai. Ki ba'arvot Moab, because in the plains of Moab, lo nitchadshu lo ela divrei habrit. The only new thing coming out of there were the words of the covenant, kasher nitparish bo, as is expressly stated there. Says the Ramban, all these new laws were taught to the Jewish people as a first time, but they were given to Moshe right at the beginning, in that first year. Ve'al kain, next paragraph down, lo ne'emar b'sefer hazeh vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. This is what you were coming up to, Mark. There is no God spoke to Moshe, saying, or Tzav b'nei Yisrael, command the Jewish people, or Daber b'nei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people, v'amatar and saying to them, mitzvah ploni, this particular mitzvah. Aval lo nichtavu ha-mitzvot b'sfarim harishonim sheyidaber im yotzei Mitzrayim ki ulai lo nehegu ba'otan ha-mitzvot rak ba'aretz af al pi shehein chovat haguf. These mitzvot, however, were not written where they were first given in the earlier books, where he speaks to those that came out from Egypt. And perhaps the reason is because these mitzvot were obligatory only in the land, even though they affect personal conduct. and do not depend on the land. Kasher babinyan hanesachim, the libations, obnei she'enan tadirot, lo hizkirak bevanim nachalei haaretz. Or it may be that because they were not of common occurrence, he mentioned them only to the generation, these who are inheriting the land. Thus ends the words of the Ramban to his introduction to Sefer Devarim. So again, what is Ramban trying to address here? Some of the common questions which we may have. Where's the Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor? Where's God spoke to Moses saying? There's none of that. Why are there no korbanot? Why is that seemingly repeated? Says the Ramban, you got it all wrong. It isn't really a repeat. Yes, there are repeats, but really that's just to remind us and further dictate and explain just what those punishments might be and the consequences of the more severe transgressions which were likely. And also, the Kohanim were like the rabbis of the time. They didn't need all the reminders. So it wasn't that, God forbid, there is multiple authors of the Torah. Rather, who needs teaching? It's the rank and file. And what do the rank and file need to be careful about? The most severe transgressions which were most likely to affect them, the laws of idolatry. And why isn't it, and why are these new laws here? Because these laws might be connecting to Eretz Yisrael, they might be one-offs, or it might just be, this was the appropriate place. But all of these mitzvot were given when? At Sinai. And so therefore, anyone who wants to say, I want to keep the first 4 books of the Torah, but Devarim, you know what? It sounds a little funny. It sounds like there's somebody else involved. I don't want to keep them. Says the Ramban, absolutely, these are all interconnected, and we must keep every single one of them. Okay, questions about the Ramban's introduction?
What I hear you saying is, that it's like if you were to give a Pesach refresher course right now, it wouldn't be relevant to us because it doesn't matter. But if you do it anytime after February, it's useful because the information is fresh come Pesach. So Devarim is the refresher course on what Bnei Israel had already maybe heard, but what they really needed to know before entering.
Especially the laws of idolatry and what it would be like coming up against other nations. It's going to be very apropos. The city, that's why we're going to have the laws of the Arei Miklah, the city of refuge. What's going to happen when you come across non-Jews, and how you're going to, what's going to be, and is it going to be a milchama? Is it going to be how we're going to have Milchemet Reshut and Milchemet Chabad? We're going to have an obligatory war. Is it going to be a voluntary war? What terms do we have to give? Can I cut down trees? Can I make, what are the laws of the army? They're apropos, which is, right now, I'm going to give laws about Tisha B'Av, but I'm not going to talk about it in 2 weeks.
Actually, even the laws regarding false prophets
Right.
became more relevant because Moses wasn't going to be there.
Correct.
So now what happens for the next generation?
What's going to happen? It's going to sound amazing. How am I going to know? And you're going to want to have a king. No one wanted a king when Moshe was around, but there could become a time. And maybe there'll be others who are appropriate. So to me, whenever we're thinking about the Ramban here, the Ramban, I would have expected him to say, here's why Devarim is so important. It's all about the whole reason why we left Mitzrayim in the first place, why we had a Jewish people, to be in the land. It doesn't really jump on that. Rather, what does he focus on? The reason why these mitzvot are here is because these are the most likely ones you're going to trip up upon, and these are the most likely you're going to be involved in, which is, what do I need to know? It's almost like I'm converting to Judaism. What are the courses which you need to know? You need to know the laws of Shabbat and Kashrut. Why? Because those are the things that you're going to do every single week and every single day, and they're going to be the ones which you might have issues with. It's not going to be the laws, for example, of Shemitah. Because Shemitah is going to be every 7 years. Not, you are going to have certain things, but we're not going to focus on it as much. The Torah is saying, Devarim, what's going to be there? What's going to be like as farmers entering the land of Israel? What are we going to need to know? Before we can become farmers, we have to be warriors and conquer the land. But once we settle down, what do we need to know? That's what's coming out here, and that's what Devarim is about. And the Ramban is just addressing all of those pieces and saying, and don't have any of those questions in the back of your mind about the authenticity of this work. I got really good, palatable answers, which, with real intelligence, answer these questions. Now, I will say, there's still a question about linguistic style and approaches, which the Ramban, if he were here, what would he say to us if such questions were raised? How could he address them? I believe the Ramban would have an answer, the same way I feel that Maimonides would have an answer to the questions of any modern attack on the Torah and say, but this sounds like it's written several hundred years later. I think the Ramban would come and present it just like this and say, all these answers, there's an answer. They can all these questions, there's an answer. It can all be resolved. Now, if we have difficulties, we have difficulties. I don't think that we should say, the Ramban has answered it away, and we can say, job done, I have no more issues, I'm walking away. Like it's like one of those questions, always funny, which is sometimes a rabbi will ask someone, so do you have any questions? We're like, yeah, I don't really have any questions, I'm doing fine. The rabbi would say back, you don't have any questions? How about mine? I got a lot of questions. We have to have questions. We have to have difficulties that which we're struggling with. What I like about the Ramban is he's trying to address issues. He's like saying, it's okay to have questions. It's okay to have doubts. And I'm going to try and give you some answers. If you don't find these answers compelling, guess what? And he doesn't do that because the Ramban style isn't like that. He doesn't say, P.S., if you don't like my answers, offer your own, because he really believes in his answers. He doesn't say, he doesn't, sometimes you'll see with the Ramban style, he'll quote a Rashi and then we'll say, this is okay, but it's not really the right answer. And sometimes he'll just say, Ibn Ezra, you're totally wrong, or Rashi, this is not the right one, it's not close. Here's what I think is the answer, or this is the close reading of the text. The Ramban is not afraid to say, I have the answer. But there's also here, there is room. If you read between the lines, the Ramban is giving us an opportunity to say, these are good questions. Here are my answers. What would you suggest to some of these questions? But I think that's the way to do it. Carrying on. V'terem sheyatchil b'biur haTorah, hitchil lahochicham ulehazkir lahem avonotehem kama yimruhu bamidbar v'kama shehitnahegi mahem hakadosh baruch hu b'midat rachamim v'zeh lo hodia chasadav imahem. Before I translate this, whenever you read Devarim, especially Parashat Devarim and before parts of Vachanan, it's a downer. It's a history of, you messed up here and you messed up there and I'm so tired and it's so hard. You would think, what's going on here? Why is Moshe beginning with this? Says the Ramban. Before Moshe commenced the explanation of the Torah, he began to give them musar. He began to reprove them, reminding them of their sins. Why does he remind them of their sins? Not to be a Debbie Downer, not to make them depressed. Rather, how Hashem conducted himself towards them with midat harachamim, with the attribute of mercy. This was to inform them of his mercies towards them. That what? Don't feel down when you hear about all the mistakes of the previous generation. Why? Because you're going to make the same mistakes, or maybe you're going to make even more mistakes. Why shouldn't I feel down about that? Because Hashem lives in midat harachamim, with the attribute of mercy.
Right.
We deserve, and no matter how far, sometimes you can read Chumash and you can think, wow, why couldn't Hashem have given them a break? You could read it like that. You could also read it as, wow, look how many times Hashem didn't get angry. How many times Hashem was merciful. Hashem, how many chances. It was only when we spoke Lashon Hara about Eretz Yisrael. It was only when we said that Hashem is not big enough, is not strong enough to overcome. It's only then Hashem said, you know what, you're going to have to stay in the desert for 40 years. Really, all of this is telling us, don't get down, because no matter how many times you fall, you're going to get up again, because Hashem's got your back. Hashem has midat harachamim.
I think this, if we think, okay, well, Devarim was given at this time for the entry into the land, to bolster the people up for entry land, that's great for that one moment. But as the Torah is always and forever, and it is always read in this season of Elul and into the Chagim, and that time of personal reflection and Rachamim, it's crucial.
But it's interesting that you said that, because when do we read the saddest moments, when we feel the worst? It's always Devarim, which is always the Shabbat Chazon, Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. And when, according to Chazal, did Tisha B'Av, when did the sin of the spies happen? Chetz HaMeraglim, on Tisha B'Av. To tell us, when should you feel the lowest, feel the worst about what we have done? Right now. But after Tisha B'Av, exactly, then we know that we can have a tikkun, we can fix that which we made, and Hashem does act in Rachamim, and so therefore, whether it's breaking the Luchot, or it's speaking Lashon Hara about Eretz Yisrael, Hashem will have Rachamim on us. And whether it's 40 years in the desert, or whether it's Yom Kippur and He forgives us, Hashem forgives us, and we can conquer, and we can enter our own spiritual Eretz Yisraels. And also that, and just translate, just read here in the English, the second paragraph, that they be chastised by His words, so they do not revert to their degradation. Okay? Why do I tell you? Don't fall into that trap, lest they be swept away in all their sins. But, and here's the bit, ulechazek libam, but to strengthen their hearts, behodi'u otam, and to inform them, ki b'midat harachamim yidnaheg imahem la'olam, that the way that the Hashem conducts this world is through mercy. Olam chesed yibaneh, I shall build a world on chesed. Okay, on mercy. Shelo yomar adam, so a person should not say, lo nuchal lareshet et haaretz, I can't inherit the land. Why? Because there isn't a person who doesn't sin. What will happen? He'll say, I'm going to sin, and I'm in Eretz Yisrael. What's going to happen if I sin in Eretz Yisrael? I'm going to be off. The land's going to vomit me up, as it says in Vayikra. I'm going to be out. To another rabbi who I love, Rabbi Cook. What does Rabbi Cook say? As well as those who learn Yomam V'Alayla, those who learn day and night, who else are partners with Hashem? He said it about the secular kibbutzniks, those who were eating pork on Yom Kippur, those who really hated everything about Torah Judaism. He said they were partners. How could you say that? Because Hashem lives in a world of rachamim, of mercy. That God has mercy, that eventually their descendants will not live like that. Okay? That there will be a time where there is a rejuvenation and a return to Torah values. Maybe not everyone will be Torah observant, but there'll be a return to Torah values. And so therefore, we can have this world where we're not worried, if I sin once, perhaps I'm going to get vomited out of the land. Lachein, Hodiam Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, Moshe, our teacher, informed them, Ki Hadosh Baruch Hu Rachaman, that God is merciful. He's the merciful one. the ultimate in mercy. Maleh rachamim, full of mercy. Ki haselicha v'mechila mimenu. For forgiveness and pardon come from him. Yitbarach, may he be blessed. Siua v'azar lebnei adam b'avodato. And he helps. He's an assistance and help to people in serving him. U'chi'inyan she'amar ha'katuv ki imcha haselicha lema'an tivareh. As the Torah says, for with you is forgiveness, so that you may be feared. Says the Ramban here, and that, by the way, I apologize, that is the conclusion of the introduction of the Ramban on Devarim. Don't think that this is a mountain we cannot climb because we fall and we stumble. It's something we can do all the time. It's so easy. It's not so easy, but it's not. I made a mistake. I did something. I was half asleep. I did something I shouldn't have. It's not like that at all. Life is about making mistakes and learning from them. Why? Because Hashem is Rachamim. Hashem is the Rachaman. He is the merciful one, and therefore we can get up and we can continue. Okay. And you would have a few more minutes, so I wanted to bring you just one short piece on this parasha. And that is on the Perek Aleph, Pasuk Yud Bet. The Torah uses the word Echa. And the Torah, this is the only time in the Torah that we have the word Echa. Okay? And this word comes up in, obviously, Megillat Echa. It comes up in the Haftarah that we're going to read of Rabbi Hassan. But that's about it. So when I see a Pasuk which says Echa, and it's in the week before Tisha B'Av, I'm going to take a special note. So what does the pasuk say here? Echa esa levadi. How can I carry by myself? Torchachem u'masa'achem v'rivechem. All your trouble, the efforts, all your weight, and all your quarrels. Like you could really feel the strain of Moshe Rabbeinu. Mark's nodding his head. He knows the rabbinic life, the difficulty of leadership,
I'm
of
just thinking
having.
about the fact that in the Ashkenazic tradition, we chant that verse to the melody of Echa. Which I was sort of disappointed last year when I heard the Torah, this Parsha, and I said, I missed that. I was waiting for the...
I have seen it being done, not here, but I have seen in Sephardic congregations do it also.
Yeah.
It's a nice one to remind us of, but you're reading this pasuk, what's it saying? How can I carry you alone? It's too much for me to bear. But look at these words, the Torah, the effort, the load, and the riv, and your quarrels. So what's going on here? So the Ramban says, your trouble, your burden, your strife. V'al derech hapshat, Ramaz Moshe Rabbeinu lahem l'shloshet hadvarim she'amar li Yitro. Here, Moshe is reminding us of the three issues which he was telling Yitro. Shehayahu oseh la'am k'moshe Perasha sham. All the three issues that he was struggling with as a leader back in Parashat Yitro. V'hazikaron, his kiran li Israel beremez, and here he mentioned them as a hint to the Jewish people. Amar, he said, Torchachem. What does it mean, Torchachem? Keneged v'hodati el chukei Elohim v'et Toratav. What does Torchachem mean? And I make known to them the laws of God, the statutes and his laws. Ki torach gadol haya, for it was a great effort, a difficult task. L'lamed, to teach, liyotzei Mitzrayim, those who came out of Egypt, hachukim v'hatorot, the statutes and the laws, uperusham, and their meanings, ubeuram, and their interpretations, v'sodam, and all the different secrets coming on here. Says the Ramban, it's a hard job for Moshe Rabbeinu to be the leader teaching Torah to that nation, to that generation. V'hizkir mas'achem, and what does it mention here? The masa, the load, keneged l'drosh Elohim. That Moshe not only felt he had to teach them Torah, he felt he had to pray on their behalf. Shu inyan tefillah, shemitpalel alehem. He had to pray for them. V'rivechem, and your quarrel, k'pshuto, inyaneha mishpatim. What does your strife mean? Not all the machlokot which they brought upon, rather it's a matter of judgments. It's their internal strife between one friend and his neighbor, all the quarrels of, this is my property, no, this is your property, this is my land, this is your land, my stick, your stick, my cow, your cow, it's my cloak, it's your cloak, no, I've got half of it, you've got half of it. All those struggles over does it belong to. Says the Ramban, why is it this week that we're reading about this? Why is it in Devarim before Tisha B'Av? It's the moment where we feel we cannot do it. It's all too hard. It was too hard for Moshe. Perhaps it's too hard for us. And that's why I say, go back and read that second paragraph of the Ramban. It's that moment where it's all too hard. Why am I telling you it's all too hard? Because Hashem is the Rachaman. Right now, it feels I can't get out. It's all too hard. But God is all merciful. He's the merciful one. And no matter how much I feel, you know what, I just want to sleep a little more, or I don't feel I can do all the tasks that I want. Hashem is the Rachaman. He's the merciful one. And whatever we put our minds to, not we can do it, Hashem will help us. And we will succeed because Hashem will be the merciful one to help and support and engage us so that the difficult task in front of us become that much more achievable and we can succeed.
What's striking about his interpretation is that I never read it this way. He's making the complaints completely personal. I've got to teach them all this stuff, and I've got to. In other words, he's not talking about, God, you put me in charge of these people. They're a burden. They're troublemakers. He's complaining about what he has to do.
And it's very similar to what happened in Behalotecha, where we see it. But it's coming up in Yitro. Why did Yitro suggest? Because Yitro could see it.
Yeah.
Moshe hadn't vocalized it, but he could see it on Yitro's face. He could see it on Moshe's face. Yitro could see it on Moshe's face. It came out in Behalotecha. But when he's revealing in Devarim, what's it telling you? His attitude. His defeatist attitude was. And that's what Moshe is telling you. Why could I not succeed? Because I felt that you were too much. Had I felt I could do it, it didn't matter how hard it was, I would have succeeded. And so Hashem is telling us, here is the solution. If it's too hard, put your trust in Hashem. And for those of us who doubt ourselves, well, wait, I'm not worthy. I don't deserve Hashem's help. Because I'm a sinner. Because I make mistakes. It doesn't say here, it doesn't matter. Hashem will forgive. And Hashem will help. It doesn't, again, it's not a Christian it's not a Christian theology here of it doesn't matter what you do. It's saying, no, if you care, Hashem will help you. Hashem will support you. Hashem will forgive you. And you will get up and you will carry on. And that difficulty will be overcome. It's not whatever you do doesn't count or doesn't matter as long as you believe. It's not that. It's I'm going to strengthen you and you're going to get through it and we're going to be able to do it together. Okay, I want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. Obviously next week will be Tisha B'Av, so no class, but we'll pick this up again in 2 weeks. Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom. Baruch Adonai Olam.
Amen.
We'll be here later.
Amen.